What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to our channel, we essentially create content that discusses mental health through pop culture and introducing you to a couple cool movies along the way. My name is Captain Nostalgia. I'm a writer, podcaster, and the director of our film festival here. The name of the film festival is Horrific Hope. It's the first of its kind to be mental health focused and horror centric. If you guys would like to submit your screenplays, feature films, and short films, please click the links in the descriptions below. And while we're on the topic, special shout out to our sponsors for this upcoming year in Diabolical DVD, Convicted Printing, and Fierce Literature. If you guys would like to support us and sponsor this year's film festivals, those links are also in the descriptions below. Down there, you'll also find links to pick up today's movie, which we'll be talking about on physical and digital release, as well as links to our social media, mental health resource library, and how to support us financially as well. Today we're going to be talking about The Loneliest Boy in the World. Now this hits physical media, so Blu-ray, DVD, as well as digital, beginning this upcoming Tuesday, December 20th from Go Entertainment. This movie chronicles the story of Oliver, who essentially loses his mother, and in terms with grieving the loss of his mother, he turns to grave digging to create a nuclear family which are filled with zombies. Let me just start off by saying that if you guys have ever listened to our horror podcast, Abyss Gazing, or you've ever met me at a convention, you know that I am not really a fan of zombie films. I think they're all right, but when you talk about zombies, you have to talk about the originals, talking about the Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Living Dead, and Day of the Living Dead. Pretty much anything George A. Romero has touched. Outside of those, I'm just not really a fan of it. I feel like they've been done to death, literally, and I just feel like it takes something really special to kind of make me recommend a zombie film, and I have to say that this might actually be a strong recommendation for me. The thing that I liked about this movie is how it didn't feel like a conventional zombie film. And it's like zombies aren't really even the main focus of it. It's a film that just happens to have zombies in it. I really love how this film explores grief and kind of the aftermath that comes with grief and how grief affects your mental health and your sociable skills as well. I feel like that's something we don't really talk about a whole lot. We'll talk a little bit more about it in the mental health section of this video, but it also is worth mentioning that Oliver's mom basically, to say was overprotective would be a smidge of an understatement. And the crazy thing about this movie is that it feels like a John Waters movie. Like visually, this movie just kind of reminded me of Serial Mom a whole lot. If you think Abyss Gazing should do a podcast on Serial Mom, let us know in the comments below. If you've seen this movie, what do you think of it? I think the color palette that embodies this world really reflects the tone of this movie, and I feel like that's something that you don't really get to see a whole lot, or at least that's not something that like ever is placed on my radar. This movie is very vibrant in color. There's a lot of pinks, there's a lot of purples, and I really liked that. I felt like it gave this movie its own identity. I mean, I feel like even looking at the cover of this, the way that the blues and the pinks really pop is really reflective of the color palette that this movie has. And I think even likewise, this movie has a lot of heart and has a lot of surprise depth that I just feel like feels like a rarity in horror comedies. Like, don't get me wrong, the horror comedy genre is definitely, it's supposed to try and make you laugh, but it's also trying to scare you at the same time, or it's trying to take at least terrifying concepts that are familiar to you and incorporate them in a comedic way. And I think sometimes the meshing of the horror content into the comedy aspect, they do really work, but it does take a very specific, very unique filmmaker in order to do that. And very talented filmmaker also, I should say. So shout out to Piers Ashworth, who wrote the script, and Martin Owen, who also directed this movie, because I feel like they captured that blend really well in this movie. That said, I will say the comedic elements of this movie don't always work. Like, there are moments where you ever watch a comedy and you see that, like, there's like you can tell that there was a joke that was written there and it was supposed to land and it just didn't land. Now, of course, comedy is a very subjective thing, so what makes me laugh doesn't necessarily make the viewer watching this right now laugh, and that's fair to say, but for me, the comedy in this movie was just very down the line. It hit a few times, but you could definitely tell that the screenwriters were trying to make it and shape it to where it was landing more times than it actually does in this movie. And that's kind of the sad thing about this movie. It's a very fish out of water story, and I feel like fish out of water stories are very much a hit or miss when it comes to the comedic elements. It seems like it's a very easy thing to make comedic, but also at the same time, like, this one unfortunately just doesn't land with that. The performances do, however, land. Max Harwood, who plays our antagonist, Oliver, does a great job at really bringing a lot of depth to this character. This character feels like he can really chase after your empathy as a viewer. And I really liked that. And I found myself oddly connecting with him because, like, I feel like in some ways, like, growing up I was the weirdo and, like, kind of like had that, like, weird sociable disconnect, and I really liked how, like, it made me almost feel nostalgic watching this. And I think Harwood does a great job at bringing a lot of those emotions to this script, but also at the same time it brings a lot of charm as well. And this movie is very charming. I love the relationship that we have with Oliver and this zombie nuclear family. Susan Wokoma, Ben Miller, and Zenobia Williams play his nuclear family, mom, dad, and sister. Hero Fiennes Tiffin plays the best friend Mitch in this movie. I love the chemistry between Mitch and Oliver. I thought that it brought something that this film just made this film really special. And equally, I think Wokoma and Miller's chemistry as the mom and dad, going from essentially two strangers that really hated each other pre-zombie to being this, like, 1950s nuclear mom and dad, just was such an interesting flip. But also the chemistry that they have is just impeccable. But this film isn't scary by any means, and again, terror is, again, much like comedy, is subjective. I didn't find this movie terrifying at all. In fact, I feel like the use of the horror elements with the zombies and even some of the gags, like, there are some cool blood gags in this, and there are great homages to icons like Freddy and Jason. I think that they do a really good job balancing the comedy or lack thereof. And it never feels really heavy-handed to where it's leaning into too much of the horror or too much of the comedy. And I think this movie just balances it perfectly, and it ties it together with its charm and just lovability. I think the pacing of this movie is really impeccable. I love the balance that this movie has between the genres, but also as it's developing this family. And climaxing into both a heartbreaking ending, but really sticking the landing with the character development in this movie. I think they really allow the Oliver character to grow, and again, the character development is one of the most impressive things that this movie has to offer. Alright, well, let's dig up a Rorschach rating scale and see where this one's gonna land. I'm going to go ahead and give The Loneliest Boy in the World a 3.5 out of 5. I think this movie is incredibly charming. It's really sweet. It has some laughs, but again, it does stumble with its comedy elements. I'm going to go ahead and give The Loneliest Boy in the World a 3.5 out of 5. I think this movie has a lot of charm and has a lot to offer. It is a really refreshing take on the horror genre. The performances are good, the cinematography is good, the direction's good, pacing is good. But again, it doesn't always stick the landing with the comedy, so it creates these really awkward voids of space between the characters and the audience. And as a result, also kind of makes the film feel a little rough to get through in sometimes. But you guys can judge for yourself this upcoming Tuesday when Wellgo Entertainment drops this everywhere that you guys pick up DVDs, Blu-rays, and wherever you guys get your digital movies from. We'll provide a link in the descriptions below to where you guys can pre-order your copy today. Well, let's talk about mental health. If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health out of the content of which we're talking about and hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health for just a few moments. As I mentioned previously, our protagonist, Oliver, is a little bit socially awkward, and with that awkwardness comes, of course, bullying. I feel like it's really easy to kind of talk about bullying and kind of the signs of bullying, but that's not really what I want to talk about. And if you are being bullied, the links in the descriptions below are available, specifically made for anyone going through those. There's a really sweet moment between Ben Miller's character, who plays the father, and Max Harwood's character, who plays our protagonist, Oliver, to which, after being bullied and Frank kind of going zombie dad on the bullies, which is a great moment in this movie, they go inside and Frank says this line to Oliver, to which he says, "You're not alone anymore." And I'm curious how many of us need to know that and need to let that fact really sink in to the innermost part of our soul. Because depression likes to strip all of our feelings, all of our resources aside and just let us suffer in silence. It speaks things like, no one will understand what you're going through, you're alone in all of this. Even going into things as drastic as conversations of suicide, addiction, or self-harm. And I just have to take that moment from Frank and just say that you're not alone anymore. Everyone who creates content here at Victims and Villains have gone through seasons of depression, anxiety, have felt at sometimes moments of not wanting to live anymore, have experienced the pain of losing someone to suicide, struggled with addiction, or have been with someone that has gone through addiction and have even battled with self-harm. The reason why we create this content is exactly that reminder of why Frank tells Oliver in this that you're not alone. In the description for this video, you'll find a link to our mental health resource library, resources battling everything from just suicide prevention, depression, bullying, and more. Proof that someone is always willing to listen to you and remind you that you're not alone and that you have value and worth. And I just want to echo Frank and say that you're not alone anymore. Okay? I hope this was an encouragement to you guys, and I hope that you guys will check out The Loneliest Boy in the World when it hits Blu-ray, DVD, and digital beginning December 20th. And thank you guys for watching.